Shadows of the Past. In the dimly lit corridors of the United Nations headquarters in New York, chaos erupted as the official interpreters faltered one by one. The high-stakes emergency summit on global refugee crisis had ground to a halt, with delegates from 8 different countries shouting over each other in a babel of tongues: Arabic, Mandarin, Spanish, French, Russian, Swahili, Portuguese, and Hindi. Microphones buzzed with static, translators' booths emptied as exhausted linguists admitted defeat, their headsets tangled in frustration. The world watched live on screens across the globe, tension mounting as billions held their breath. But then, from the shadows of the janitorial closet, a humble figure emerged. A man in faded overalls, mop in hand, his face etched with quiet determination. As he stepped into the spotlight, the room fell silent. Who was this cleaner, and how could he possibly save the day? Little did anyone know, this was Marco Ruiz, a single dad scraping by on minimum wage, whose hidden gift would stun the world and rewrite his destiny. Marco's life hadn't always been confined to scrubbing floors and emptying trash bins. Born in a small village in rural Mexico, he grew up in a melting pot of cultures. His mother was a seamstress from a Spanish-speaking family, his father a migrant worker who picked up bits of French and Portuguese from travels across borders. But tragedy struck early when Marco was just 10. A devastating earthquake leveled their home, claiming his parents' lives and leaving him orphaned. Shuttled between relatives in different countries, Marco found himself immersed in a whirlwind of languages. In his aunt's home in Quebec, he absorbed French through playground games and schoolyard brawls. A year later, with a distant cousin in Moscow, he picked up Russian by eavesdropping on heated family dinners. By 13, he'd landed in Kenya with missionaries, where Swahili became his lifeline during long, dusty days helping in orphanages. Each move was a survival tactic, a way to blend in and avoid being the outsider. Languages weren't a hobby. They were his armor against a world that kept uprooting him. As a teenager, Marco dreamed big. He scraped together scholarships to study linguistics at a community college in California, where he honed Hindi and Arabic through night classes and online forums. Mandarin came next, traded for favors with Chinese exchange students. By 20, he spoke 8 languages fluently, his mind a tapestry of idioms and accents. But life had other plans. He fell in love with Elena, a vibrant artist from Brazil who spoke Portuguese with a melody that made his heart sing. They married young, had a daughter named Sofia, and for a brief, golden period, Marco worked as a freelance translator for local businesses. The pay was decent, the work fulfilling. He imagined a future where Sofia could attend good schools, where they could travel the world not out of necessity, but joy. Yet, fate twisted again. Elena was diagnosed with a rare, aggressive cancer. Medical bills piled up like autumn leaves, forcing Marco to sell their home and take multiple jobs. Elena fought bravely for 2 years, but in the end, she slipped away, leaving Marco alone with a toddler and a mountain of debt. Now, at 35, Marco's days blurred into endless shifts. By dawn, he cleaned office buildings in Manhattan, his callous hands gripping brooms, while Sofia slept in their tiny, subsidized apartment in Queens. Afternoons were for freelance gigs when he could snag them, translating documents for immigrants at community centers, but those were rare. Evenings belonged to Sofia, homework help, bedtime stories in whatever language she fancied that night. "Papa, tell me about the Russian bears again," she'd beg, her eyes wide with wonder. Marco would oblige, switching seamlessly between tongues, making her giggle. But beneath the smiles, worry gnawed at him. Sofia's school noticed her talent for languages, mirroring his own, but resources were scarce. The neighborhood was rough, riddled with gangs and drugs, and Marco feared she'd get lost in the system like so many others. He applied for better jobs, interpreter positions at hospitals, courts, even the UN, but rejections came swiftly. No formal degree, they'd say, or lacks professional experience. His resume screamed, janitor, not polyglot. Poverty clung to him like grime on a window, and self-doubt whispered that his gifts were wasted, buried under layers of hardship. One particularly grueling night, as Marco mopped the UN's Grand Assembly Hall after hours, he overheard delegates practicing speeches. The words flowed in Arabic and Mandarin, pulling him back to his nomadic youth. He murmured corrections under his breath, translating effortlessly. A security guard caught him once, chuckling. "You sound like you could do their jobs, buddy." Marco shrugged it off, but the seed was planted. Little did he know, that same hall would soon become the stage for his redemption. Challenges mounted. Sophia fell ill with a persistent cough, the kind that kept her home from school and Marco up at night, fretting over doctor visits he couldn't afford. Bills stacked up, eviction notices loomed. In desperation, he took on extra cleaning shifts at the UN, hoping proximity to power might spark opportunity. But opportunity doesn't knock. Sometimes, it crashes through in crisis. The summit day arrived like a storm. Marco was on duty, invisible as always, wiping down railings while world leaders argued. The topic was urgent. A refugee wave from conflict zones, with testimonies from survivors in multiple languages. Interpreters, overworked and underprepared for the dialect nuances, began failing. One mangled a Swahili phrase, sparking outrage. Another tripped over Hindi idioms, delaying proceedings. The chairperson, a stern diplomat named Dr. Aisha Khalid, banged her gavel. "We need alternatives. This cannot continue." Whispers rippled through the room. Marco, pausing his mop in the back, felt a pull. He knew those languages intimately, not from textbooks, but from life. Hesitation gripped him. Who was he to intervene? A cleaner, a nobody. But then he thought of Sophia, of Elena's dying wish for him to embrace his strengths. Stepping forward, heart pounding, he raised his hand. I can help," he said in flawless English, then repeated it in 7 other tongues. The room gasped, echoes of triumph. Dr. Khalid eyed Marco skeptically, her brow furrowed. "Who are you?" she demanded. Delegates murmured, cameras zoomed in. Marco, standing there in his stained uniform, swallowed hard. "I'm just the cleaner, ma'am. But I've lived in those worlds. Let me try." With no other options, she nodded. Marco took a seat at the interpreter's console, headset on. The first testimony came. A Syrian refugee speaking rapid Arabic laced with regional slang. Interpreters had stumbled, but Marco translated smoothly, capturing the pain in the man's voice. "We fled bombs that shattered our homes, leaving ghosts in the rubble." The room nodded, understanding dawning. Next, a Chinese activist in Mandarin, Marco conveyed her urgency about forced displacements. One by one, he bridged the gaps. Swahili pleas from African migrants, Hindi stories from Indian families, Russian accounts from Ukrainian borders. His voice shifted accents effortlessly, infusing emotion where machines and tired professionals had fallen flat. Delegates leaned in, tears in some eyes, as the human cost of crises came alive. Word spread like wildfire. Live streams exploded with views, hashtags trending, hashtag cleaner polyglot, hashtag UN hero. But for Marco, it was personal. Midway through, a Portuguese speaker from Brazil recounted losing a spouse to violence, echoing Elena's battle. Marco's voice cracked, but he pushed on, resolving to honor her memory. Challenges arose even then, technical glitches with the mic, skeptical interruptions from elitist aides who sneered at his background. "How can a janitor know this?" one whispered. Marco ignored them, focusing on the faces of refugees whose stories finally landed. By session's end, resolutions passed, increased aid, opened borders for the vulnerable. Dr. Khalid approached him, eyes shining. "You've saved this summit, Mr. Ruiz." "How?" Marco smiled faintly. Life taught me. Loss even more. The aftermath was a whirlwind. Media swarmed Marco as he left the building, Sophia waiting outside with a neighbor. Papa, she cried, hugging him. Reporters fired questions. 8 languages? How? Marco shared his story humbly, crediting his journeys and hardships. Offers poured in, interpreter jobs at the UN, scholarships for Sophia, book deals, speaking tours. But the real resolution came quietly. With newfound stability, Marco paid off debts, moved to a safer home. Sophia enrolled in a gifted program, her own linguistic talents blooming. He founded a non-profit, teaching languages to underprivileged kids, turning his pain into purpose. Challenges lingered. Grief for Elena never fully faded, and imposter syndrome whispered doubts. But Marco faced them head-on, therapy helping him heal, community support lifting him. Years later, at Sophia's college graduation, Marco reflected. He'd spoken at TED Talks, advised governments, but the true victory was seeing his daughter thrive. The world learned that heroes aren't always in suits. Sometimes, they're in overalls, mopping floors while harboring worlds within. Marco's message echoed, in the face of failure and loss, our hidden strengths can bridge divides, inspire change, and prove that no one is truly just anything. Persevere, embrace your story, and you might just stun the world.